Those of us drawn to the paranormal often find ourselves in the kind of deep, unusual conversations that rarely happen in everyday life. As someone who seems to attract these interactions more than most, I'm well used to the standard fare: unexplained bumps in the night, sudden cold spots, or the classic shadowy silhouette moving just out of sight. But occasionally, something is shared with me that really creeps me out. This time, it found me in the form of some very old family folklore. The report that follows comprises a chilling prediction, a catastrophic event, and a family secret passed down through the decades, serving as a harsh warning against messing around with things that should best be left well alone. A very talented musician and good friend of mine, Hejos Hills and J, recently shared this account with me. It's a massive piece of lore in his family, and a story his nan used to tell with absolute seriousness. While most of our nans warned us about the everyday dangers of playing too close to deep water or crossing busy roads, Hejos' nan had a very different, far darker danger she wanted him to be cautious of. The exact dates of what followed have been lost to time. While deep archival research might uncover the hard facts, for this report we are going to focus purely on the chilling folklore itself. Hejos' nan sadly passed away a couple of years ago, taking the finer details with her to the next place. But to set the scene, this sequence of events unfolded sometime in the 1940s. Off family feuds. To set the scene, we are looking at Hejos' great-granddad, Poshchek, and his great-nan, Ajen. They had a young daughter together named Zite Haleb, who would later become Hejos' beloved nan. Before Poshche met Ajen, he had been married previously and had a daughter from that relationship called Arelicino. From what Yas's family remembers, Relicino usually lived with her biological mother. However, for a period of a few weeks during the 1940s, she came to stay with Poshche, Ajen, and little Zita Haleb. If you've ever navigated the complexities of a blended family, you know how high tensions can run. Ajen and her stepdaughter, Relicino, were no exception, and simply did not get along, clashing constantly under the same roof. The atmosphere in the house grew thick with resentment, and Ajen was rapidly reaching her breaking point. She desperately wanted Relicino to return to her mother's, but time seemed to drag. As each day slowly rolled past, the energy within her home grew suffocatingly heavy. She decided to invite some friends over one evening to clear the air and restore a little normality to her everyday life. They had the house to themselves and were complaining, gossiping, and sharing a much-needed laugh. Things were finally beginning to feel normal again. Then, whether out of boredom, morbid curiosity, or just the spiritualism of the era, someone suggested indulging in something a little more taboo. Let's turn down the lights, close the curtains, and get out a Ouija board. At first, it went exactly as you'd expect. Nothing profound happened. It was entirely lighthearted, just a bit of a parlor game while they sat around chatting about random things. Someone asked a silly question, and the board spelled out an equally silly answer. Eyes narrowed, and smiles widened around the table as they playfully tried to guess who was pushing the planchette. But then, Ajen asked a specific question. Frustrated by her living situation and feeling a sudden spike of anger, she spoke out loud. When will the daughter be gone? She meant it purely in a physical sense. When would Relicino finally pack her bags and go back home? Nothing happened. She asked a second time. The same stillness followed. The atmosphere in the room started to tighten, with her friends noticing the shifting energy. A few snide remarks were thrown around the table at whoever was supposedly pushing the planchette. Not so brave now, are we? Has Ajen scared you? Followed by some giggling, everyone assuming the group's prankster had just lost their nerve. But Ajen wasn't laughing. She had become focused on the board. She asked for a third time, this time with conviction in her voice. That was the moment the energy in the room turned ice cold. Achios said his nan described it as an instant, full-body chill hitting everyone at the exact same time. The planchette, which had just been lazily sliding around spelling out jokes, violently darted across the board with everyone's fingers still glued to it. It spelled out H-H-E. H H Y H L O L L L L L L L O L L L O L L L L L H S L O O N H S S S O O. They immediately packed the board away, mutually agreeing that they'd had more than enough of that game for one night, and it was probably best to just leave the evening there. Aftershocks. By the next morning, Ajin had convinced herself to dismiss the entire ordeal as a prank in terrible taste. She rationalized that someone at the table must have been harboring a grudge against her, and she'd have to do some digging later to find out who it was and why. However, just a few days later, the message on the board started to bleed into the physical world. An emergency situation arose back at Relicino's mother's house. Details on what the emergency was are lost to history, but it was urgent enough that Relicino had to get home immediately. Given the urgency and the distances involved back then, she was booked onto a flight. The family traveled down to the airfield to see her off. Pasha and Ajin stood watching as Relicino boarded the plane. I try to imagine what was going through Ajin's mind at that moment. Relief that her stepdaughter was finally leaving, or a lingering, uneasy memory of the board's rapid spelling just days prior. The plane began to lift off the runway. As a cruel coincidence. It was at this point, right before their eyes, that disaster decided to strike. The plane suffered a catastrophic engine failure. It completely lost power, dropped out of the sky, and crashed right near the airfield. Relicino was tragically killed in the wreckage. Just days after the Ouija board emphatically promised Ajin that the girl would be gone soon, she was dead. The investigation. When Hayas finished telling me this story, I was genuinely creeped out. Naturally, my first instinct was to put on my researcher hat and start digging into the few facts I had to go on. But here is where the story gets frustrating, and a tad more mysterious. Without exact marriage certificates, death records, deep genealogy files, and unrestricted access to historical aviation crash databases, unearthing the hard truth of that day is almost impossible. We also need to factor in the age of the story and how perception can change over time. During the 1940s, civilian air travel was heavily restricted due to the war. If Relicino was placed on a small, privately chartered flight, an emergency military ferry, or if she was traveling under her mother's maiden name instead of her father's surname, the official records would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to track down today. Furthermore, as stories are passed down through 80 years of family history, the exact decade or the mode of transport can sometimes shift. Details are lost as the memory begins to fade. But the core trauma remains. My thoughts. The lack of definitive proof makes this story 10 times scarier, in my opinion. It elevates it from a tragic historical fact to a deeply personal, chilling piece of folklore. It's a tragedy that slipped through the cracks of the official archives, living purely in the memory of the family who experienced it. One thing, though, is certain. To those who witnessed the tragedy unfold before their own eyes, it was absolutely real. My friend Hios believes this story to be absolutely authentic. To this day, Hios's family has one golden, unbreakable rule: do not mess around with Ouija boards. The trauma of that prediction was drilled into his nan, who drilled it into her children, who passed it down to Hios. That warning is still spoken today, nearly a century on from its author. Reflecting on it all, I can't help but wonder, did the board simply predict an unavoidable tragedy? Or, in a moment of anger and frustration, did Ajin unknowingly invite something much darker to intervene and grant her wish in the most horrific way possible? My brother, Lou, has been trying to off me since we were kids. He was Daddy's favorite. His methods used to be amateur, foxglove mixed into my chili. A cheeky shove down the stairs at a fundraiser. New, a year younger, equally unhinged. He tried to slice my throat when I was 8. When you're rich, actions do not have consequences. From birth, we knew we were special. Knew we had to fight to inherit our father's fortune. If we fucked up, we either shifted the blame or covered it up. New killed a classmate in his sophomore year. One 5-minute phone call with our mother, and the boy never existed. Barali was the youngest, the smartest. She played people like cards. I wasn't any better, the stereotypical rich bitch. As long as we made donations, we could get away with anything. Zero consequences made killing each other easier. Zero consequences meant zero empathy. When we were 16, Barali tried to burn us, and the estate, alive. Daddy lectured us in his office. Going against him meant getting my gold card revoked. So I pasted on a smile. Sorry, Daddy. Slew? Daddy nodded at my brother, who rolled his eyes. Sure, he muttered. New didn't say anything, arms folded, gaze glued to the ceiling. Barely stood silently, a charred matchstick clenched between manicured nails. Hold hands, Dad instructed us. Now. We did. Reluctantly, I grabbed Barely's hand, who snatched Lou's. New, after exhaling a long, dragged-out sigh, accepted Lou's. It was humiliating. My blood boiled. My cheeks burned. Barali's hand was too cold. Lou's was too warm. Slimy. Barali drove the heel of her 800,000 stiletto into my toe when Daddy wasn't looking. Lou dug bloody half-moons into my palms. The two of them wore wide smiles for Daddy, perfect porcelain poker faces, while squeezing the breath from my lungs. Daddy's lips curved into a smile. That wasn't hard now, was it? He leaned forward. Daddy was old. Not normal old. Rotting corpse old. I expected him to be 6 feet fucking under by my junior year. I want my children to always be together, Daddy crooned. His tone held a terrifying authority I couldn't disobey. So we made an unspoken pact. When our father breathed his last breath, the killing game would continue. But Dad didn't die until I was 24, 98 years old. 8 years had passed. Enough years for resentment and hatred to fizzle out. Enough time for me to develop an attachment to my siblings. I cared that Lou was engaged. I cared that Barali and her girlfriend were trying IVF. I cared about New and his stupid private island full of stray kitties. So, the day that Mom called me crying with the news, I felt lost. Wrong. I retrieved my gun from my bedroom, the one I'd hid as a 16-year-old, promising myself I would shoot my siblings dead the moment our father croaked. Lou immediately tried to kill me when I turned up at his penthouse in the Silver Spire district, gun pointed between his eyes. I remembered how to find the perfect trajectory. But my brother wasn't stupid. He opened the door, kitchen knife already tracing the curve of my throat. New was sitting on his sofa, legs crossed, nursing his bruised eye. Barali leaned against the wall, cigarette between her lips, a golden lock of hair twirled around her finger. She'd been scalped, half of her ponytail ripped out. Lou's penthouse was trashed, his lounge resembled a war zone, couch tipped over, telltale splatters of blood staining rich marble. Wait, Lou whispered when I tried to pull out my gun. Ruby, wait. I let my hand drop, and in turn, he let his knife hit the ground. Dad left us a letter, he whispered, his breath heavy in my face. My brother held up an envelope sealed with Dad's signature. Before we dong anything, rash, he gasped out. We should probably read it. I surrendered my weapon. Right. Lou stepped back with a grin. Then we'll open it together. Barali and New joined us, and we ripped it open. The letter itself was folded into a tiny pocket square. I impatiently watched my brother unfold it, my hands already twitching to pull out the knife I'd hidden in my jeans back pocket. My dear children, Lou read out, holding the letter up to the light. Dad's writing was barely legible, written in intricate black ink. My final wish is for you to be together, Lou read out, his lips forming a smile. He let out a relieved breath, and I dropped all pretense, that feral, almost animalistic urge in my bones bleeding away. So, Lou continued, his voice breaking. His hands holding the letter began to tremble. I have organized a procedure to be conducted the second I take my last breath. He dropped the letter, letting out a hiss. What the fuck? I snatched it up, scanning the rest. Do not worry, I've tested it on animals and then human subjects. the full merge of the four of you, your bodies and minds melded together. That is my last wish. New snatched the letter off me and pulled out a lighter. This never fucking happened, he hissed out, igniting the parchment under a dancing flame. We never read it. The fucking thing never existed. I watched Dad's letter erupt into smoldering black. A sickly-looking Borali nodded, grabbing my hand. Then the door flew open. A suited man, a lancing flung over the top. He smiled widely. The DVR siblings. Ah, good. You're all here, he said. He led in several people wearing surgical masks. The man pulled on light blue gloves, already stained scarlet, and held up a syringe, filling it with blue liquid. I'm here to fulfill your father's last wish. He nodded at me, lips splitting into a grin. Ruby, you will be the head. Where is this tree house my kid keeps talking about? I read on the neighborhood Facebook group. I hadn't lived in the neighborhood for long, maybe 2 or 3 months, but I already understood the post. My son, Jaime, had been talking about the same thing every night before bed. Dad, can I go to the treehouse tomorrow? When I first heard it, I said yes. I didn't know what he was talking about, but we were new to the neighborhood, and I thought it would be a chance for my boy to make some friends. Despite my initially excited response to Jaime's request, it was actually quite some time before I followed through and took him to the treehouse. When Jaime called me out on breaking my promise, staring at his little face, I knew I had to step it up as a father. The next morning, I woke him up with breakfast, scrambled eggs coated in sugar, just the way Jaime had always loved. He had learned the recipe from his papa. I knew it wasn't the healthiest, but I couldn't resist making it for him and seeing his awfully adorable smile. God, the boy smiled like it hurt, but it was his, and he wore it proudly. After we finished breakfast, I washed up and told Jaime the news. You up to visit the treehouse now? There it was once again, that toothless, painful smile of his. I felt like I was nailing this single-parent thing. I didn't need to hear his response. I asked him where it was, expecting the name of a park or even some kid's address. But no, he grabbed my hand and took me to my own backyard. He pointed at the tree. I may not have lived here long, but I lived here long enough to know that there was no treehouse back there, and that's exactly what I told Jaime. When I did, he just laughed and told me, "No, Dad, you can't see it from down here. We have to climb." He giggled like I was an idiot, and confused, I played along. He took my hand once again, and we started climbing the tree. I hadn't done it in years, so I was slow, and admittedly, I was scared of heights, but I didn't need Jaime to know his dad wasn't some man of steel, so I just kept it to myself, whispering, "Don't look down, just don't look down." And that's exactly what I did, kept my eyes on the sky. Jaime, however, was like a spider monkey, climbing the tree with the energy only an 8-year-old child could have. He was getting further and further away when my parental instincts kicked in, and I realized I probably shouldn't let my 8-year-old climb so high up. I shouted at him that he needed to come back down, but when I looked around, I realized I couldn't see him. The tree was tall, so tall that you would have to damn near break your neck to see the top, but I thought we were about halfway up, and there was no way he could be so far from me. With every shout, I heard no response. I could no longer hear the sound of his joy, or the slight crack of the branches. No, it was silent. I could feel the breeze, cold, like I was higher than I thought. I felt unsettled, the silence, the cold breeze, and the loneliness, all making me panic. Chills ran down my spine, tears forced their way out of my eyes, and my legs were shaking. I finally looked down. The ground was gone. It was just there, and now gone. There was just more tree, going on and on forever. The tree was not this fucking tall. The vertigo hit me, and I could feel myself starting to lean, starting to fall. I didn't know what the hell was going on, so I just hugged the tree tight, feeling the bark against my skin, leaving imprints as I white-knuckled the damn thing. I was cheek to wood and sat with my eyes shut, squeezing them closed with the same force Jaime used to smile. Jaime. I almost forgot about my boy, and that was the worst part of the whole damn experience. How could I call myself a dad if, in the face of fear, I couldn't fight for my own child? With that motivation, I opened my eyes. Taking a breath, I looked around. I wasn't seeing things. branches reaching out on all sides like a twisted ladder to an even more twisted heaven. Had I died? Did I fall and crack my head? And if so, what about Jemay? I shook my head. If I died, what was I to do? Absolutely nothing. But here, right now, there was something I could do. I could keep climbing. But which way? My brain was telling me down, but Jemay had been climbing up when I last saw him. I wasn't leaving him, not my boy, my Jemay. So I ignored my brain like any loving father would, and I climbed. I climbed with anger, I climbed with fear, I climbed with sadness. So many emotions were coursing through me, but I needed to reach my boy, and he was moving much faster than I was, so there was no time to stop. I don't know how much time had passed, but it was getting dark. Wherever I was, time still passed like normal, and I was getting tired. I broke down in tears, my hands were shredded, warm blood flowing along the creases of my palms like rivers. My body was sore, and worst of all, my son was still nowhere in sight. I cried, and did the only thing I could to let it all out. I screamed. It was the first time I made a sound in what felt like hours, and it sounded horrid, cracking and breaking as I wailed like a banshee. After which, I sat in the infinite silence for who knows how long. I could feel myself slipping into unconsciousness, but I was jolted awake by that falling feeling you get in bed. But this time it was real. I caught myself, grabbing onto whatever I could and holding on tight. I nearly died, my efforts were almost for nothing, but what were my efforts for? I said it earlier, what if I already died? Or what if this was a dream, and falling was the only way out? And if I had almost fallen, what if Jemay had? I didn't know it, but all the thoughts had me crying again. I was only alerted to it when I felt a tear drip from my cheek onto my thigh. That one drop was like a cold plunge that snapped me out of it. I wiped my tears away and focused. I grabbed my belt and tied it around my waist and the tree trunk. If I was going to make this climb, if I was going to find Jemay, I needed to sleep. I needed the energy. I didn't know how far I had to go, but I was going to keep going until I saw Jemay's smile again. The image was my motivation, my reason for living through this hell, just as it had been throughout the rest of my life since his birth. I kept that picture in my mind until my body slipped away into a deep unconsciousness. So deep that when I awoke, I was being torn apart. Birds. Birds had begun eating at my broken down body. Chunks of my thigh were ripped from me, like it wasn't mine to begin with. They pecked with greed, and I tried to fight back, undoing my belt and thrashing it around like a lunatic, whipping at the black birds until they flew away with parts of me, parts that I would never get back. I sat for a minute, resting in the pain. Who knows how long they had been eating at me. Drips of blood ran off my body and into the forever below. I continued my climb, the pain in my hands becoming unbearable as the adrenaline wore off. Much to my dismay, I had to stop. How much more could my body take? Maybe I needed more rest. I sat there straddling that tree branch, feeling the grooves in the bark against my legs. It hit me. I had my phone. I know how insane it sounds, that I never thought of that when this all started. But I rarely have my phone on me. I try to avoid using it. I don't want to set a bad example for Jemay. I pulled my phone out and dialed 911. What they were going to do, I have no clue, and I would never find out, because the phone never stopped ringing. I kept trying over and over. Never once did it pick up, never once did it go to voicemail. It was just a perpetual ringing, a sound I actually enjoyed because it was a break from the silence. Thinking back, not even the birds had made a sound, but this was a sound, one I would cherish. I must have sat for hours enjoying that tune because the sun was starting to set once again. I was failing Jemay, I know, but my body couldn't stand the idea of beginning the climb again. So I stayed right where I was. I pulled up the notes app on my phone and started typing out all this. I just wanted to kill some time, and who knows what was to happen to me. This way, maybe somehow, someone would find my phone and find Jemay if I couldn't. That leads me to now. My body is broken, maybe my mind too. But Jemay's smile is still pushing me to keep going, and I need to see it again. So if you're reading this, please find Jemay. What you just read was my notes from a few months ago. After what happened next, I completely forgot I had ever written this, but I figured I should finish it and post it here as a warning to others. I fell, I had lost consciousness. My body breaking down and unable to keep going, I gave in and slipped into the darkness. The next thing I knew, my body slammed into the ground, waking me up. It hurt, but I didn't even have time to process the pain before all the sights and sounds overwhelmed me. I was back in my backyard, back on that dewy, wet grass, surrounded by my wood fence, and looking up at the same tree this all began at. But it wasn't a happy sight. I was back on the ground finally, but Jemay wasn't. Laying on my back, I was facing the horrid sight of my little boy, eyes glazed over, twisted among the branches, and that same painful, toothless little smile stretched across his face. The birds were eating at him, taking my son from me piece by piece, using his body as a nest. I screamed. I wailed in horror and fear and sadness. My ball of sunshine was now a mangled corpse, food for the birds, but God, he was still smiling like he was home, right where he was meant to be. Nearing the end of my scream, I finally noticed that dreaded sound. My wail wasn't met by silence. No, I could hear the screams of neighbors. All the yelling was meeting in the air and making a twisted song for all to hear. Mothers, fathers, grandparents, all walking into their own backyards and staring at the horrors found in the trees. The kids had found the treehouse. It first happened on a Wednesday. I was standing in the atrium, waiting for my son's art class to end. A woman I vaguely recognized, one of the other teachers, hurried over to me. "Your daughter's looking for you," she said. I blinked. I don't have a daughter." "Oh, sorry. I must have gotten mixed up." She smiled and headed back for her classroom at the end of the hall. I figured it was an honest mistake, especially considering that I'm a very average-looking woman, with brown hair, brown eyes, and an average build. Probably half the kids in the class could be mistaken for my kid. But then it happened again. I was grocery shopping late at night, one of the only ones in the store. I heard the pattering of footsteps behind me, and when I turned around, one of the employees was running up to me. "Excuse me, ma'am," she called. "I think your daughter's looking for you. She's at the—" "I don't have a daughter," I said, cutting her off. "Are you sure?" Then she shook her head and nervously looked away. "Sorry. My mistake." She turned around and headed back down the aisle. Well, that was weird. What's the saying? If I had a nickel for every time someone thought I had a daughter, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't much, but it's weird it happened twice. I finished up my shopping. When I got to the counter, I saw the employee at the end of the cashier lines, whispering to another colleague. Weird. A few days went by, and nothing happened. I'd almost completely forgotten about it when I got a call from my son's pediatrician. "Hello, Miss Triminigan," the receptionist asked. "I'm calling to schedule an annual physical for your daughter." "I don't have a daughter." "Oh, I'm terribly sorry. It says here," she cut off. "Never mind. Have a good day." She cut off. "Never mind. Have a good day." I stared at my phone. 3 times now? This felt really, really weird. How could so many people suddenly think I had a daughter? I told my husband all about it. He thought it was a hilarious coincidence and didn't seem nearly as unnerved as I was. "Maybe the girl's mom looks like you, and she's describing her to the teacher and the cashier girl, and they think it's you." I guess that's possible. That doesn't explain the doctor, though. Maybe someone just moved here with a similar name. Maybe. The whole thing felt wrong, especially because I'd always had this weird feeling that I was meant to have a daughter. There was always this weird void somewhere inside me, a whisper that would surface every now and then. A daughter who looked like me, who I'd give all my wisdom to, who would draw with me, play dolls with me, do all the girly stuff with. It was stupid, because gender didn't matter anyway, especially not when it came to loving my children. But there was still a strange emptiness I felt sometimes. Maybe I was pregnant one time with a girl and miscarried before I even knew it. That was an offhand thought I'd had several times, and the body remembers the score. On my lunch break the next day, I walked down to the local bistro. Halfway there, I heard someone calling out behind me, "Ma'am, ma'am." I turned around to see a man looking frazzled. "Your daughter is back there calling for you." "I don't have a daughter," I said, my voice a weak thread. He turned around and pointed back, as if I should go to her anyway. I looked up, and just for a second I saw a little brunette girl, just slices of her, through the group of people behind me, ponytail bobbing, little blue dress, flickering through the chaos of the sidewalk. When the group passed, she was gone. I stood there, unable to move. The man had already hurried off, and I couldn't budge. That's her. I knew I didn't have a daughter. I knew there was no way that was my child. I knew it. Then why do I feel like she's mine? After work, I drove to pick up the boys from school, but my head was somewhere else. I kept thinking of the girl. I knew it was crazy, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. I pulled up to the curb to let the boys in. The minivan door rolled open. But instead of the usual chaos, yelling and punching each other, there was only silence. And then, "Mommy?" Ice slid through my veins. It wasn't my boys, it was her. I'm not your mommy," I forced myself to say. I glanced in the rearview mirror to see a sliver of dark hair, a little ponytail. Her face was hidden out of view. "Mommy," she said again. Oh God. It was fun to entertain the idea of an imaginary daughter, but hearing a different child's voice calling me mommy was like a jolt of electricity. "I'm not your mom," I yelled. "I don't have a daughter." I glanced up at the mirror again. I froze. The girl had readjusted, and I could now see her face, her lack of a face. Skin stretched over the contours of her skull. Only skin. And yet, as I stared at her, I could swear the way her cheeks moved, she was smiling. I screamed. A second later, Darby and Nadia crashed into the back, fighting as usual. I looked back at them, panicking, but the girl was gone. Shaking, I pulled away from the curb and started for home. Maybe I would have chalked it up to stress, sleep deprivation, something else. But every night, now, I hear her voice, in the middle of the night, jolting me out of my dreams. "Mommy?" Coming from the closet. Look, I'm not some helicopter parent, alright? If anything, I'm more easygoing than most of my friends with children. That's probably what got us into this mess in the first place. My little girl is a handful, to say the least. Attitude problem, authority problem, lying problem. Still though, she's my little girl, my only child. It's my job to keep her safe and to maintain a good relationship with her. However, once the boy problem started, it was borderline maddening. I actually had to put my foot down and not just tiptoe around the situation. The first few guys were, subpar. Not at all what I wanted for her. First, it was some stoner kid named Drone Ban, who could barely keep his eyes open at our introduction dinner. Then it was this hotshot, daddy's money type of guy, named Exla, who, for the entire dinner, would not stop blatantly flirting with the waitress in front of all of us. I didn't even have to convince her to leave that one. She was so heartbroken that, as soon as the dinner was over, she pretty much demanded he never text her again. Oh, and who could forget Sarab, the high school quarterback who showed absolutely no interest whatsoever in anything other than sports, workout routines, and protein. Just back-to-back red flags over the course of what I want to say was about a year and a half. After her latest interest failed, she actually took a break from the guys, to my absolute relief. She focused on herself, studied hard, brought her grades up to a B average, and got closer with the family. It was nice. It was like we had our little girl back. That is, until she met Bojack. The thing about Bojack was, he was perfect. He had a good head on his shoulders, dreams of college, aspirations to become an accountant, and he was already holding down a job at the local shopping center. He actually paid for our dinner, all four of us, like it was nothing. Not even just that, but the entire night, he was an absolute joy to be around. Charismatic, maintaining eye contact, he literally had the entire table laughing, not even 30 minutes into the evening. It was all going so well that I didn't even flinch when my daughter planted a long kiss on his cheek before blushing and hurrying back to our car. Unlike with the other guys, she actually seemed to be in love with Bojack. I could see it in her eyes. Not to mention, in the 4 weeks since they started dating, there was a noticeable improvement in her attitude. She was maintaining her grades, being respectful, being honest, the whole shtick. I had a silent hope for the boy. A part of me truly believed that finally, I wouldn't have to worry about my daughter getting the treatment she deserved. All of those hopes were shattered in an instant, though, because, fuck it, of course they were. After my daughter had kissed him, Bojack didn't even seem to register what had happened. He just stood there, staring at me blankly. After what looked like a brief hesitation, he began walking in my direction, like he wanted to ask me something. Me, being the naive old dad that I am, thought that he was going to ask if they could go out again the next night. I was already mentally preparing my whole have her home by 9 speech. Unfortunately, that is not how it went. As he approached, he drew his shoulders back, standing confidently in front of me. And the first words out of his mouth were enough to have me on the brink of punching him in his mouth. "You have a lovely daughter, sir. She's going to sell for millions." Their friends advised them to undergo a trial separation. They went on separate retreats to the Swiss Alps, but they realized it didn't help. So, they decided to divorce. Without a prenup, they argued bitterly. "I want 60% of the estate," the wife demanded. "Nonsense," the husband retorted. The wife grew furious and yelled, "You'd better listen to me, because I could kill you right now. If I weren't such a nice person, I would do it." The husband laughed and replied, "And how are you going to kill me? Remember when we went on our retreats?" the wife responded. "Well, I learned black magic very well. In fact, I became an expert. I could kill you right now if I wanted to." The husband roared with laughter. "You know what? Do it. I dare you." "Fine," the wife replied. "Give me some of your fingernails or a lock of your hair." The husband nodded. He looked at his hands and said, "Too short. I'll go cut off my hair in the conservatory and bring it back." When he returned, he found her surrounded by lit black candles, holding a wooden effigy in one hand and an obsidian dagger in the other. He handed her the lock of hair, and she wrapped it around the effigy and raised the dagger. "Don't say I didn't warn you," the wife yelled, and she stabbed the effigy. And the husband thought to himself, "I've always hated how she leaves clumps of her hair on the shower walls." "6 months ago, we were in a car accident. Udej suffered heavy brain damage. At the time, I didn't care. Anything was better than the alternative. I stayed at my husband's bedside, held his hand, and prayed he would come back. And he did, but he was different. When he first woke up, I felt like I could breathe again, like life had meaning again. Udej was always awkward, in a sweet way. He spoke softly, even his wedding vows were more of a whisper. But he was also loud, hilarious. His stupid sense of humor made him not just my lover, but my best friend. Before the accident, he was singing at the top of his lungs. Halfway through Poker Face, he drove straight into oncoming traffic. Speaking to his parents, I told them I knew something was wrong when he opened his eyes and stared straight through me. Like I was a stranger. Like all those memories we made, everything we were, had unraveled. He told his own mother to go fuck herself, his face red, eyes wild. "Get away from me," he kept screaming, spittle flying with every word. He flailed like he was restrained. "Get the fuck away from me." He spat at me when I kissed him, and smiled like a psychopath when I broke down. Speaking to my therapist, I always said the same thing: I can do this. But lately, denial was starting to taste sour, bubbling up my throat like soda pop. The truth was I couldn't. Not anymore. My husband was a shell. Lesa, Odeja's mother's eyes were raw when she opened the door. Unbrushed curls hung loose, and I could tell she hadn't slept. How could she, with Odeja screaming all night? Mrs. Trunnis's smile was strained. Half British, her accent was always comforting. She welcomed me inside. I could already hear my husband's twisted laughter from upstairs, a shiver crawling through me. "Why don't you come in?" I smiled politely, stepping inside. She made tea, and we sat down. I was thinking, I spoke up, swallowing my sobs. Udajay's mom just stared off into space. Mrs. Trueness. I spoke louder, and she jerked. Her gaze was hollow. Are you enjoying the tea, Lisa? It's a special recipe. Her finger danced around the rim of her empty cup. Udaj used to make it when he was little. Mrs. Trueness's voice cracked. Today, he told me he was going to stab me through the heart and hang my intestines. Her laugh exploded into a sob. I want to take Udaj somewhere special. I choked on the words, letting them spill from my mouth like barf. When his mother's eyes lit up slightly, I pulled my lips into a smile. I know he's not supposed to leave the house, but maybe it will help him remember. Her lips twisted into a grimace. She tapped twice on her cup. And where exactly are you planning on taking? My son? I weighed my words. Our honeymoon spot? Lisa, I know you are his wife. She leaned forward, sharp eyes scanning me up and down. But if his parents cannot rouse life out of him, then I very much doubt you can. Mrs. Trueness. I smiled through gritted teeth. We've been going there since we were kids. It's just the valley. Something in her expression shifted. She knew the exact spot I was talking about. Tears filled her eyes, and she swiped them away. I'll bring him back before dinner, I promise. I felt like a kid again. Knocking on her door and demanding Udaj come play. Mrs. Trueness simply stood and turned away. I'm going to check the flowers in the backyard, she said, her voice wobbling. Remember, dinner will be at 6, shepherd's pie. I nodded, walked upstairs, and helped Udaj into his wheelchair. You're a fucking bitch, he spat, as his father helped me lift him downstairs. Udaj's threats fell on deaf ears as I wheeled him outside and helped him into my car. Udaj's father offered me a hug, burying his head in my shoulder. Thank you, Lisa, he whispered. I nodded, jumping into the car and switching on the radio. Poker face. When Udaj's father staggered up the driveway, I turned to my husband's smiling face. Admit it, Udaj chuckled as I backed out. I'm a fucking great actor. My parents ate that shit up. I laughed, shoving him. Please. I had to method act, even when it was just us. Your psycho bitch of a mom would have noticed if it wasn't convincing. Truly Oscar-worthy, he giggled, leaning back. I enjoyed the sparkle in his eyes, his wide smile. Then we hit a speed bump. Udaj's head smashed into the window. Fuck. I fucked up. I tried turning off the music, but in my panic I cranked it louder. His eyes flickered, suddenly wide and frightened. Lisa, he panted, lunging forward. What the fuck did you... I kept one hand on the wheel and reached over, just like I had when I jerked the wheel and sent us into the other lane while he was driving that day. I slammed my fist into his temple. Red dripped down his chin. There were always two Udajs, one who was pushed down and the other who got to keep the body. I fell in love with the others. One. The Udaj who cursed his parents for trying to push him down. The Udaj who didn't ignore my fucking existence. The one whose parents tried to cut away, pretend he didn't exist. Shh. I hum as my husband's eyes roll back. I run my fingers through his hair, unable to resist a giggle. Go to sleep, babe. I elbow him. Harder. His head hits the window with a meaty smack. I switch the song and crank it up as he stirs. I prefer the other one. The tree had stood for more than 100 years. The community had gathered to protest its removal. They held signs and formed a line between the bulldozer and the oak. The developer stood beside his truck with the permits in his hand and waited for them to understand that their presence made no difference. You can't do this, one of the protesters said. That tree has been here longer than any of us. It's part of this community. It's a tree, said Vance. Wood and leaves. There are thousands just like it. And it'll make excellent mulch. He smiled. I own the land. The permits are signed. The zoning board has approved the development. You bribed them, someone shouted from the back. You think standing here holding cardboard signs is going to stop a bulldozer? He laughed. This is business, and business always wins. Make it quick, he called out to the operator. I want the lot cleared by the end of the day. The oak came down in sections over the course of an afternoon. When the tree was finally removed, Vance walked across the cleared lot and felt satisfied that the project could proceed on schedule. The first symptoms appeared 3 weeks later. His skin felt tight across his shoulders and back. He assumed it was sunburn from the site inspections, but the sensation did not fade. Over the following days, the skin began to harden. Not painful exactly, but rigid, like scabs forming across broad sections of his torso. He saw his doctor, who examined the affected areas and took tissue samples. The results came back inconclusive. The doctor referred him to a dermatologist, who referred him to a specialist who eventually admitted he had no explanation for what was happening. "I've never seen anything like this," the specialist said, reviewing the biopsy results. "The tissue samples show cellulose. I don't understand how that's possible." "Fix it," Vance said. "I don't know how," the doctor replied. He tried other doctors. He sought second and third opinions. The diagnosis was always the same. His skin was dry and painful, and the process was accelerating. No treatment showed any effect. By the second month, his feet had begun to change. They grew wider and thicker. The bones restructured themselves in ways that made walking difficult. His shoes no longer fit. He had custom orthotics made, but within a week, those no longer fit either. The scabs on his skin had spread to cover most of his body. He tried cutting them away with a razor, but they grew back overnight, thicker than before. The texture was rough and deeply furrowed. His joints had stiffened to the point where all he could do was stand. He spent most of his time motionless, conserving energy for essential movement. Months later, small green shoots pushed through the pores of his skin. He tried pulling them out, but they were rooted deep in his tissue, and removal caused bleeding that took hours to stop. He stopped trying to fight what was happening. He stopped seeing doctors. He sat in his chair and felt his feet growing heavier. The soles had split open, and root-like structures were emerging. He remained in the chair for days before he managed to crawl and drag himself to the bathroom. Then one night, he heard a voice. "Return what was taken." The voice came from outside, from the direction of the Oak Haven site. "Return what was taken." He crawled to the door, down the front steps, and across the yard while the voice grew louder and guided him forward. He finally reached the Oak Haven site. The townhouses were half built. He crawled to the center of the lot where the oak had stood. The ground was bare dirt, packed hard by construction equipment. The ground beneath him softened. His feet sank into the soil. He felt the earth pulling at him gently, then stronger. His feet extended downward. His arms branched toward the sky. The ground pulled him down. The construction crew arrived the next morning and found a human-sized sapling growing in the center of the lot. It had not been there the day before. The project manager came by later that afternoon and ordered the crew to leave the tree alone. They built the townhouses around it. They constructed the central courtyard with the sapling at its center. The tree grew unbelievably fast. By the time the first residents moved in, the tree had grown tall enough to provide shade. No one questioned where it had come from. Sometimes on windy nights, the residents heard sounds that seemed almost like cries, but trees creaked all the time. When I was 8 years old, my brother Teliel went missing. He was just 13 years old, but older siblings have this aspirational quality to them. He just didn't come home one day. They looked for days, but couldn't find any trace of him. I was too young to understand what was going on, so I had to sit in my room and play with my Legos, hoping there'd be a knock on the door telling me things would be okay. There never was that kind of knock. They didn't find him. As days turned to weeks, the search parties stopped. But even after everyone went home, I was still out looking for him. I'd take the long road home from school. I'd go down paths I hadn't checked. I had a crumbled up map in my pocket with circles around places that I knew he liked, and I was hell-bent on checking them all. People don't just disappear. It doesn't work like that. But after a while, there were no places left to check, no circles left to draw, and Telial was still gone. The last thing he said to me was, "Later, Gator." I don't think you ever truly come to terms with something like that. Once you've run into an impossible question, you look for answers in everything. I got really into puzzles and brain teasers. not because it was fun, but because leaving unsolved mysteries gave me an immense sense of dread. I was a great student and one of the top contenders in the debate club. Again, not because I enjoyed it, but because I hated not knowing. When I got a little older, I started volunteering for search and rescue parties. I'd made myself known to local law enforcement and informed them that I'd gladly volunteer. I figured if I couldn't find Tell-Y'all, perhaps finding someone else's missing sister or brother was the second best thing. At the very least, it could help me sleep at night. I know there are a lot of people saying, get over it, but you can only get over so much. I'm in my early 30s now. You can forget their face and the hopes you had growing up, but you can't forget the impact they had on you. You can't forget your own lived experience and the damage those years of uncertainty left. Even if I were never to hear the name Tell-Y'all again, I could never forget the feeling of having the trajectory of my life take a sudden left turn. I'd like to talk about a search party I signed up for a couple of years back. At that time, I had been part of dozens of organized searches. I knew some of the people involved, and I was familiar with the gear. I got there early, taking some time off work. I put on the high visibility vest, the gloves, and grabbed the backpack, radio, water, flashlight, and a couple of chocolate bars. A first aid kit was in a waterproof bag. Now, I'd never found someone on a search like that, but that didn't mean I never would. You must believe in the best case scenario. We weren't handed a GPS, which surprised me. Turns out we were going underground, so we were handed filtration masks to protect us from harmful dust and dead air. The missing person was a 17-year-old urban explorer. I live in a city with a transit system, and he'd been exploring an abandoned hub at the city limits. The family had been notified of a social media post pointing at the approximate location, but the details were sketchy. To help with the search, power had been restored to this part of the tunnels. Most of the emergency lights were meant to last for years, so there shouldn't be too much of a problem getting around. We were assigned into sections and teams, where we were instructed to only follow lit-up corridors and hallways. However, as parts of the hub had been abandoned mid-construction, there would be dark sections that were unfinished. If we found such an area, we were ordered to call it in and ask for further instructions. And with that, we were off. I was a bit miffed about not getting to see the abandoned station platform. That thing was supposed to be huge. Instead, I was assigned to one of the maintenance tunnels. It was originally meant to house heating pipes, but the pipes were never added. Instead, there were lines across the wall and the occasional hole in the ceiling. You could tell they must have been surprised about the project shutting down. I found a whole toolbox abandoned by a half-mounted door. There were some personal items still in it. I was in a team of 4 people. We went down the halls slowly and methodically, calling out to the missing person as we went. We stuck to our side of the search and kept in radio contact with the organizer. It was hard to see what all the spaces were supposed to be, as we'd occasionally come across entire rooms with little to nothing in them. It made it hard to explain what we'd checked, as we couldn't accurately describe what was what. Was this supposed to be a control room or some kind of plumbing junction? Where on the map exactly was this supposed to be? We came to an unusually long corridor that split off in 3 directions. While staying within earshot, we decided to split up. I got all the way to the end of the hallway, where I stopped by a heavy door. The thing was almost solid black and as heavy as cast iron. I got the impression that it was some kind of security door, maybe leading to an underground bunker. I called out to the others in my team, but didn't get a response. I called it in on the radio as I wrestled with the door. It was pitch black inside. The lights were out. I'm looking at a dark room at the end of hallway, C, I think. The one on the right, second right, past the boilers. Just stay within radio contact and leave the door open, the operator responded. Don't go so far you can't see the light. Got it. I entered the room. The room was a little smaller than the hallway, tickling the top of my head when I stood upright. If I balanced on my toes, I could feel the strap from the mask touch the ceiling. I tried to figure out what the space was meant for, but I couldn't make sense of it. There was only one entry point, and there were no holes in the wall for cable management or ventilation. This was completely isolated. I tapped the radio again, swaying my flashlight back and forth. There's a corridor going deeper, I said. Is someone watching my back? Yeah, there's someone right outside, the operator assured me. You go on ahead. I took a couple of steps further, shining my flashlight down the hall. The light couldn't reach the end of it. It was such a long tunnel that it triggered my sense of vertigo. Like for a split second, it was sucking me in. I had this uncomfortable thought that maybe this was the feeling of going missing, facing this endless darkness you can't come back from. Maybe Teliol had thought the same thing, once. I didn't like it. I was only a couple of feet from the door, but I decided I wouldn't take any chances. I turned to leave, and as I did, the door swung shut. At first, I didn't register what had happened. A door closing isn't a big thing. It might be misaligned, or there could be a breeze. This wasn't the case here. This door was solid metal. It wouldn't accidentally close on its own. I grabbed the handle and twisted and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. I couldn't even push it down. I'm stuck, I radioed in. The door closed. I can't get it open. Sorry about that. It happens, the operator sighed. Some of the hinges on these things are rusted shut. Stay by the door, someone will get you out. Keep your flashlight on. I stayed by the door for at least 20 minutes, knocking on it occasionally just to see if anyone would knock back. They didn't. After a while, my flashlight flickered. It was far too soon for the batteries to die. Okay, I'm going dark here, I said. Someone needs to get me out now. They're having trouble finding your door, the operator responded. Far end of the right side hall, section C, past the boiler. That's what you said? That's right. There's no door here. There's an open door frame and something that looks like a closet, but no door. That's impossible. Look, you might have the wrong order. If you went past the boilers, you could be in section C or D. There are parallel corridors. In that case, you can just follow the right-hand wall until you get to the other side. There's another search party already there. Right-hand wall, other corridor. Got it. I followed their instructions, grasping the dying flashlight. As I got to the seemingly endless tunnel, the light finally gave out. It was pitch black. I could close my eyes, and nothing would change. Being in that kind of darkness is so disorienting, you start to imagine how easy it is to get turned around, to the point where you're wondering if you really could turned around. But I kept my hand on the wall and stuck to the right. Is it far? I asked. I can't hear them. It's a bit of a walk. There should be some functioning pipes running overhead about halfway through, so let me know as soon as you hear running water. I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing reverberating down the hall. But if there was running water down there, I wouldn't miss it for the world. I kept my hand on the smooth concrete wall and continued a step at a time. You have to go slow, as even the slightest shift in elevation can send you crashing face first into the ground. When you're exposed to that kind of prolonged darkness, your head kind of fills in the blanks. You start to imagine what the space around you looks like. It plays tricks on you. For example, I started thinking I was running my hand across wallpaper instead of concrete. It was smooth enough that, while walking, you might trick yourself. But if you're just using your fingertips to see the world, you can imagine yourself in all kinds of places. My childhood home had rough, paper-textured wallpaper. It didn't take a huge leap of imagination to pretend I was back there, sneaking up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. I ended up taking my gloves off just to get a better idea of what I was touching. I got to a fork in the road and still hadn't heard any running water. I pulled up the radio and called it in. There's a split here, I said. Should I stay right or go straight ahead? A split? The operator called back. There shouldn't be a split. Are you sure? Yeah, there's a split. Straight ahead, or another right. Wait, the voice mumbled back. Wait, don't tell me. Is the ceiling really low? Yes. Why didn't you say so? Oh man, this changes things. I could hear them talking to someone in the background, forgetting to take their hands off the button. Then they returned to me. This is going to get complicated. Turns out, there were 3 other rooms with the same description as mine, and neither of them were in the sections I'd described. I must have veered far off course. I had to walk around to gather data points to identify which of the rooms I was in, but it proved more difficult than they'd imagined. For example, one of the corridors was supposed to lead to a junction, and another would lead to a ceiling grate. However, the room at the end of the corridor was incomplete, meaning we couldn't tell what it was supposed to be. I had to go deeper to figure out where I was. I would occasionally run into ladders, but they led nowhere. There were supposed to be entrances from the street, but these had long since been filled and paved. I still had to climb each one, just to make sure they hadn't missed one. The mask on my face felt more and more oppressive, like my body was packed into a box. Despite being able to move my arms around, I could feel this claustrophobic stone building in my chest, hammering a countertune to my increasing heartbeat. If I listened to it too much, I couldn't breathe. I pushed myself down another corridor, only to stop at a dead end. There was a round hole in the wall, just big enough for someone my size. That's good, that's good, that's good, the operator assured me. That means there's space for heating. If my calculations are correct, that means you are in one of these two hallways. I need you to go inside. No way. It's going to tilt downward for about 5 feet and either go straight ahead or upward. If it goes upward, you can go straight to the top. I can have someone meet you right then and there. If it goes forward, you have to go ahead, then take a left and then forward again. That'd put you in the same corridor as me. Either way, you have to put you in the same corridor as me. Either way, you have to push through. I put one knee up and traced the edges of the hole. It was too small for me to crawl on all fours. I had to put my torso in and drag myself forward with the palms of my hands. The concrete was so smooth I couldn't get a grip with my fingers, gloves or no gloves. My gear kept getting snagged on the edges. I stopped to have a drink of water and splashed a little on my face, psyching myself up. 5 feet, then up or forward. That was it. I crawled in, inches at a time. I had to stay calm. If I tried to take a deep breath, I could feel my gear pushing against the walls. It didn't hurt, but it was a constant reminder of how isolated I was. My heart was beating through my ears with nothing to distract from it. There wasn't the slightest hint of an echo. I felt the tunnel tilt slightly downward. Not much, but enough that pushing myself back up would be impossible. If I went ahead, I wouldn't be getting back up. Not unless I got space to turn around. You sure it's just a couple feet? I asked. You absolutely sure? There are only 2 rooms with that kind of vent. No matter which one you're in or which direction you're coming from, you'll be out shortly. I swallowed. I could feel the sweat stinging my eyes. I wanted to throw my mask away, like that was the thing keeping me back, but I had to stay rational. I pushed myself forward and slid downward. The tunnel evened out. I felt around for an upward exit, but couldn't find one. That meant we'd isolated exactly where I was, and I had to push forward. My palms were so dusty that I could barely get a grip. I had to resort to rolling onto my back and using the rubber soles on my shoes for traction, effectively kicking myself backward. I could feel the heat of my breath gathering along the tunnel walls. Then the tunnel opened. It was so sudden that I lost my balance, haphazardly falling out head first. I did an awkward flip, landing hard on my left hip and shoulder. It wasn't a long fall, but enough for something to get sprained. I didn't want to imagine what the bruise might look like. I grabbed my radio and held onto it for dear life. I'm out, I groaned. I made it to a room. There's only one way forward, the operator said. Go forward, then a left, and forward again. Once you see the light, let me know. I'm right at the other end. That's it? That's really it? There's no other possible way. I got up, dusted myself off, and checked my gear. It was all there. Things would be okay. I followed the instructions. I went forward and took a left. At the next fork, I went straight ahead, double-checking with the operator every step of the way. They assured me it was just around the corner. A matter of minutes, at most. At one point, he said he was banging a wrench on a pipe and that I would be able to hear it any minute now. Now I just had to go straight until I came to a door. I was jogging, keeping my hand on the wall for balance. There were these small gaps in the wall every 10 feet or so where there was supposed to be space for pipes. I'd walk, feel the gap, walk, feel the gap over and over. Then I dragged my hand across someone's face. Open eyes, a nose, teeth, and hair. I stopped and turned around, my hand shaking like I'd touched a flame. "Is anyone there?" I asked. There was no answer. I debated within my own head, trying to figure out if I should head back and check again or keep going. Maybe it was the missing person? We were still out looking for someone after all. The search hadn't been called off. I took a couple of steps back and carefully reached out with my right hand. My fingers were anticipating the touch of skin, to the point where I could imagine their heat. But as I reached further, all I felt was concrete. There was no one there. I checked thoroughly, but there was nothing. I did hear a little metallic sound, though, as something stuck to my shoe. A small key. It had some kind of etched motif, like a sunflower. Maybe a blue one. I put it in my pocket with my first aid kit and kept going, making sure I hadn't been turned around. As I got to the end of the hallway, I reached for the door. "All right, this is it," I said. "I can't hear you, but I'm at the end of the hall. There's a door there. Just open it and I'll have someone come meet you." I fumbled around looking for a handle, but couldn't find one. I checked that wall 3 times, every inch of it. It was a dead end. "There's nothing here," I gasped. "There's nothing here. Calm down, it should be on your left." "There's nothing on my left. Nothing on my right. It's a dead end. It's a goddamn." I smacked my head with the radio and heard a click. Not as in something breaking, but something clicking into place. I turned the radio over in my hand, feeling around the back. The battery cover had been slightly off. That hit had put it back in place. I opened the cover just to make sure I closed it correctly. There were no batteries in the radio. I double and triple checked. There were no batteries. "Hello?" I asked. "Operator?" I held the radio up to my lips, clicking the receiver a couple of times. There was no sound, just the clack of plastic. "Hello?" There was no response. I collapsed against the wall, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. It didn't make sense. The battery cover had been closed. Even when I smacked my head with the radio, I would have heard 2 batteries tumbling to the floor. I couldn't have lost them earlier, as then the operator couldn't have talked to me in the corridor. Something wasn't adding up. I swept my hands across the floor, checking to see if the batteries were there somewhere. They weren't. But I couldn't just sit in the dark and wait either. I had to do something, try something. This was another puzzle to figure out. There is always a solution, and sometimes you just have to make the best of the hand you're dealt. By this time, I'd drawn a mental map. All these years of figuring things out had conditioned me to collect and preserve information. It was like recounting the alphabet backwards. I just had to follow a learned sequence. I decided I was going to backtrack and try to find my way back to where I started. I made my way back to the hole in the wall and climbed inside. The upward tilt would be difficult, but I was confident that I could make it. I crawled, holding my hands out, only to feel the tunnel dip downward. I stopped dead in my tracks, my mind spinning. This was impossible. I'd been crawling down, it couldn't possibly lead further down. I crawled a little further, reaching with a full arm. This couldn't have been where I came from. Were there 2 separate tunnels? That was the only explanation. I pushed myself all the way back out, but couldn't find a second hole in the wall. I figured I must have been turned around somewhere. Taken a wrong turn, went straight, instead of right at a split, something like that. I had to slowly and methodically map out my surroundings, one room and hallway at a time. It's easy to second-guess yourself in the dark. You have nothing to rely on but your thoughts and impressions, and those are easy to misunderstand. It can be challenging even in a familiar environment. Ask anyone who's had to go to the bathroom during a power outage. I was somewhere deep underground, in an unmapped area without light or direction. I must have wandered for hours. I mapped out 2 branching corridors, leading to 3 rooms and 4 dead ends. There were no doors, and only one hole in the wall leading to a tunnel. And yes, I checked it again. It kept going downward. No, I didn't proceed that way. I ended up in one of the smaller rooms, rolling up my high-visibility vest into a pillow. I drank some water, but saved some for later, and chowed down on a chocolate bar. The others were probably looking for me by now. I tried not to think about the radio. That was a piece of the puzzle that made my stomach roll. No matter how I twisted and turned that thought, I couldn't get it to make sense. If it was empty all along, I was the problem. If it wasn't empty until that last click of the battery cover, there had to be batteries on the floor. I couldn't find any, but that didn't mean there weren't any. And yet, I didn't have a clear answer. I ended up spending the night down there. It's difficult to sleep in that kind of darkness. After a while, you don't know if your eyes are open or closed. You don't know if you're sleeping or not. The barrier between imagination and reality is paper thin, and you start thinking whatever you dream about is really there. There could be someone in the room, just inches away, and I would have no way to know for sure. It was the first time in many years that I thought about Telial. Not just the reality of him going missing, but him as a person. I imagined what he might have felt like during those last few hours, or days. Had there been someone with him, or had he faded away in the dark? He and I had always been very similar. Chances are we would think the same thing in our final moments. And if this was one of my final moments, I was scared. He would be too. I tried not to think about it. There was no way to know for sure, and imagining the worst wasn't helping anyone. He could have run away, eloped with a pretty girl, and lived in some commune. He might resurface in 20 years. You can't tell the future. But somehow, a part of me felt like it knew. It knew he'd gone someplace dark, where he could never come back. Maybe it was the next day, or just a couple of hours, but at some point, I got up. I decided I was going to check the tunnel again. There must have been some kind of misunderstanding. I drank my last gulp of water and followed the map in my mind. The layout was different. There were more rooms and shorter corridors. If you took two lefts, there were a couple of stairs. There was a larger room with a rounded floor for draining liquid. I would go down the same hallway twice, and I could swear it was different lengths. I would count my steps and end up with the same result, but one would take a minute to pass, and the next it would take 2. I felt like I was losing my mind. Every time I tried to make clear sense of that place, it seemed to shift and change. Like it wasn't finished, in more ways than one. Like an approximation of space and dimension. After my third pass around the same rooms, and still not making any sense of it, I took a break. I was leaning back, tapping the back of my head against the wall, as if trying to dislodge a good idea. Instead, I picked up the radio, clicking the receiver and turning the dials. Now it was just a plastic brick, no better than a paperweight. I checked the back, unlatching the battery cover. Still empty. Then, a noise. There's a way out, you know. The crackling voice came from the radio, but there was something about it that resonated within me, like the reverb was tickling the back of my mind. "You're not real," I mumbled. "I'm hallucinating." "Are you sure?" It's like a sensory deprivation tank. If your senses stop getting input, your brain starts firing random signals just to keep them occupied. Otherwise, it sort of atrophies. "So I'm just a random brain signal?" "I would suppose so." "Interesting," the voice continued. "So that means whatever I say is an expression of yourself." "No, it's random noise. You might as well be a cat's meow or a leaf in the wind. But what do I sound like to you? Try to categorize me, make sense of me. Who am I?" The voice was a man. Age was difficult to tell through a radio, but I was guessing he wasn't a teenager or a senior. Adult or middle-aged, with a slight hint of an accent similar to my own. That was a curious choice. "Where's that accent from?" I asked. "Wherever you want it to be from." Cute deflection. I wonder why I'm imagining you like that. Maybe you're trying to express something. Why would I care about some random person with an accent? Maybe I'm not a random person. I leaned the radio away, closed my eyes, and shook my head. "Don't do that," I whispered. "Don't say things like that." I wandered the dark for a bit, desperately trying to make sense of my surroundings. The number of steps on the stairs were different. The corridor turned right instead of left. The ceiling was lower, and the angle of the tilt in the floor of the big room was deeper. I thought I felt a door handle, but upon doubling back, I realized it was a clasp for a missing pipe. I talked out loud all that time, getting the occasional response from the radio. I knew it wasn't real, but it kept me from digesting random thoughts into something rancid. I had to stay focused on the task ahead and find a way forward. There had to be a way forward. There's no such thing as an impossible space. The operator wasn't trying to get in my head or make wild claims. Most of the time, he was just listening, adding the occasional remark when I made an incorrect statement or misinformed decision. And when I came back to the same room I'd already been in for the umpteenth time, tearing my own hair out with frustration, that voice came through loud and clear. Do you want a suggestion? You're not real. Then what's the harm? It doesn't make sense, I snapped back. I'm talking to a wall. Anything that comes from this is, at best, accidental. You have any better ideas? I flung the radio across the room, shattering it against the wall on the other side. I heard the plastic clatter and roll down the tilted floor, pooling at a small grate in the center of the room. Some of the smaller pieces trickled through. I pushed my hands against my ears, trying to clear my thoughts. Are you done? The voice wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was resonating through me, like my bones were picking up a radio signal. I didn't know what to say. Before I could open my mouth, it answered for me. Then let's get going. I was out of ideas. My tongue was going dry, and my head was swimming from prolonged stress. I could feel this sense of exhaustion seeping into my bones, turning my movements slow and sloppy. I was dragging my feet and not even touching the walls anymore. If I stumbled or walked into something, that was on me. That was fine. The operator mentioned a few suggestions. Take a left turn instead of going forward. Stick to the right. 3 steps back, sharp left. When I could be bothered to filter out that voice from the screaming in the back of my mind, I did as I was told. And slowly but surely, I began to notice things changing. There were different rooms, and the air grew denser. There was a strange smell in the air. The concrete started to feel different, more porous. Maybe this wasn't better, but at least it was new. I started hearing strange noises. There were machines overhead, pressured air rushing just out of sight, flowing water. Why'd you lead me down here? I asked. You tricked me into this. You were already tricked, the voice responded. I've been trying to get you out, but it shifts things around. You told me I could go in, and that there were people backing me up. I was trying to put you at ease while I figured this out. Figured what out? What are we doing here? It wants you to go a certain way. Haven't you ever wondered why you're always drawn to look in places you weren't supposed to? It wants you to find it. It's a find it. It's a find. It's a find. It's a sigh it. And now you're very close to doing so. And trust me, you don't want that. Why not? I said, shrugging. Why don't I want that? Because I know what happens when you go too far, when you can't turn back. Things like this want to be found in deep, dark places. I smacked the side of my head as if trying to get better reception in my mind. Like that would somehow filter out the nonsense. I came down another fork in the path, left and right. I turned right as the operator rolled back in my ear. Go the other way, he said. You're getting too close. You gotta turn away. I didn't listen. I kept going forward until I could hear something. There were noises ahead. Chatter. My heart raced as I rushed forward. Please, turn around, the operator asked. Turn around, right now. I could hear people talking. I turned a corner, and for the first time in days, I could see a door. I could see a door. There was a faint light coming from underneath, and I could hear people walking around in the other room. I ran up to it and pushed down on the handle. Someone on the other side was calling out, asking if anyone was there. The key, the operator begged. I left you a key. I pushed down on the handle and stopped. Fumbling around with my right hand, I could feel the key still in my pocket. I'd completely forgotten about it. There is a way out, but this ain't it. I promise you, this ain't it. Please don't do this. Please don't go that way. Why not? I whispered. They're right that way. Why not? I whispered. They're right there. It's not real. I made the same mistake. Don't. Go. In. My hand stayed on the handle. Someone urged me to open it. Someone asked me to take a peek. They were laughing with relief, saying how pleased they were to finally have found me. But something didn't feel right. I stepped back. Open the door on your end, I said out loud. It's not working. There wasn't as much as a tug on the handle. They came with excuses. Someone had their hands full. Someone said it didn't open from their end. Someone pretended not to hear me. The key in my pocket felt heavier as I traced the outline of the etched sunflower with my thumb. This was real. That was a real thing. What was on the other side of that door wasn't. I stepped back, and as I did, the light behind the door vanished. The voices disappeared, leaving the hallway suddenly deathly quiet. "What do I do?" I whispered. "What do I do?" The operator whispered back. "Go the other way, and don't stop for nothing." I turned around and ran as a door creaked behind me. I heard wet skin slapping against the concrete floor, stumbling forward at an awkward pace. I headed straight, then took a sharp right. The air was growing more dense, more warm. I traced my hand along the right wall, only for it to shift. The concrete grew hot and soft, like sand from the beach. Then the grains turned fine, until it was more like a sludge. It was like dragging your hand across raw chicken. "It wants you to stop," the operator said. "It's trying to distract you. Keep going." The hallway would contract and expand like a breathing entity. At times, the floor would roll, as if trying to swallow me. I could feel it tilt in different angles, making the way forward twist and turn. One moment, I'm going forward. Next moment, the hallway tilted upward, and I'm using ridges in the floor to climb a makeshift ladder. Then, I'm falling on my back, holding on for dear life as I'm thrown this way and that. All the while, something at the bottom is waiting for me to drop. Something that came out of that door, and who's tired of playing games. I was soaking wet when I came to what felt like a dead end. There was this slimy substance covering the wall, but I could push against it. It felt like trying to pop a soap-drenched balloon. Using scissors from the first aid kit, I managed to cut a big enough hole for my hand to fit and rip all the way through. As I did, everything rolled again, as something screamed in pain, not with sound, but with movement, convulsion, and heat. I could feel the compressed air press against my eardrums, making my sense of balance shiver. There was a door at the end of the hallway. It was chained. "This is it," the operator said. "Get the key. Get the key and go." It was coming down the hall, heading straight for me. It was so fast. How could it be so fast? I reached for my key and felt around for a lock. There was one. I slotted the key in, turned, and pulled. There was a click, and the chain rattled to the floor. As I swung the door open and dashed through, I turned around for a moment just to close it behind me. As I did, I saw something staring back at me from the dark. Something with milk-white skin and atrophied eyes and the wild-grown maw of an invertebrate predator. The door closed, and I stepped back, catching my breath. There was light here. The operator came through, but the voice was barely reaching me. I could hear scratches, like interference, like I was just out of reach. "Just keep going," he said. "Not far, got it from here." "What about you?" I asked. "Are you still in there?" Went the wrong way. I paused for a moment, looking back. The light was faint, but my eyes were still adjusting. I couldn't focus. "Is that you?" I asked. Really you?" I asked. Really you?" There was a short pause as the world came into view. The operator thought about it for a moment, then sighed. Is what it is," he said. "Later, Gator." I followed the sound of machinery and wandered straight out onto a platform. Early commuters saw me wandering out of a maintenance tunnel, and I was approached by a janitor. I wasn't making any sense at that point. When law enforcement came to pick me up, I was delirious. It took them hours to identify me, and I was of little help. I'd been wandering down there for almost 3 full days. I was dehydrated. They had found the missing urban explorer and shifted their rescue attempt to me, trying to figure out exactly where I'd gone off the beaten path. No one managed to find the black door that I was describing, or the corridor where it was supposed to have been. Retracing my steps seemed impossible, as nothing was the way I described it. They couldn't explain what I'd experienced. My clothes were covered in a thin layer of hydrochloric acid and potassium chloride, in a mix similar to gastric acid, like I'd been walking through a massive, diluted stomach. There were interviews, questionnaires, and even a short article in a local newspaper. Most wanted to talk about the fear of being lost in the dark and what it does to your mind. It lost its novelty after about a week, and I was back at work like nothing had happened. I still do search and rescue on a volunteer basis sometimes. I'm a bit more careful, sure, but you can't change what you are overnight. And yet, I think something has changed. I'm asking different questions nowadays, and I'm not sure I want an answer. I can't say for sure what I was doing during those 3 days, or what I experienced, but I know what I heard. I know what I heard. I know I wasn't alone. And in those rare moments where I think it was all some fake, made-up nonsense from the back of my mind, I look into the top drawer in my nightstand. That's where I keep a small key with an etched sunflower that someone left for me in the dark.